I'm struggling. I'm struggling today. Okay, here we go. Hello, fiber friends. Welcome back to the channel. Today I am sharing a project vlog from my most recent finished object, the Tea Time pullover. So if that sounds like it'll be of interest to you, I hope you'll stick around. Hello, fiber friends. Welcome back to the channel. I am your host, Kristen, here at the Media Padawana Knits, and today we are talking about my most recent finished object. So I don't always do a full project vlog for every project I finish, but I wanted to do one for this because I did test knit this design and it was just recently published, and I wanted to take just a few minutes to tell you all about it because I think it is so cute. So I recently had the opportunity to test knit the Tea Time sweater. This is a pattern by Meghan Babin, meggospurls. She is one of the co-founders of Hudson and West Yarn Company, and she is also a pattern designer, and she has quite an illustrious career as a pattern designer and editor of several knitting pattern magazines. And generally speaking, she does the most beautiful cabled sweaters. Absolutely love them. Stunning. So when I saw this on her Instagram, immediately I was like, I want to be able to test that. So as soon as she published the test knit sign up, I volunteered myself right up, and I had a lovely experience testing this pattern, which I am obsessed with. So this is my finished Tea Time pullover. I knit the size 2, which has a finished bust circumference of 41 inches, which gives me about 4.5-ish inches of positive ease. I'm so excited to wear this, and I cannot wait until it is actually cool enough to wear this. I did put it on for some photos and videos, so I'll just throw a little B-roll video in here so you can see me wearing it. You can see how it fits. And this was relatively comfortable. Of course, we do have the air conditioning on. I also have a fan, like a box fan blowing because my ceiling fan broke right before I sat down to record and I didn't have time to fix it, which is keeping the temperature down in here. When I first put it on, I was like, oh, it's so hot. But within a minute or two, I felt much more comfortable taking the photos. I wasn't like super sweaty or anything. But again, I mean, I am in an air-conditioned house, really keeping the humidity under control. So this pattern was just published on Wednesday, July 16th. And I am obviously recording this video ahead of time, mostly because I am leaving for vacation. So I wanted to have this ready to go right after the pattern was published so that when it airs, you guys can go right out and buy this pattern because it is adorable. So as you can see, this is a cable and eyelet all over pattern. So you've got this central cable, and that is on the front and the back. And then everything else are smaller, easy to memorize stitch patterns. And that big central cable is not on the sleeves at all. So the sleeves, especially, you can just memorize and go. So I did memorize all of the other patterns as I was working. The only thing I had to do was to keep track of this central cable panel. If I felt like, putting the brain power into it, maybe I could have memorized that as well, but I just didn't want to. And it was also helpful to write down where the increase rows were happening. So you are increasing the body out to as wide as the armhole is going to be. And you're working the increase row like every 12 rows or something, and at least for my size. And it was much easier than trying to count 12 rows in the stitch pattern to just mark on the chart of the central cable where those increases were. Your mileage may vary. That is what worked the best for me, but everything else was very easy to memorize. There's nothing going on your wrong side rows. So you knit your knits and you purl your purls on your wrong side rows. And I am very thankful for that. I hate when you have to pay attention to your wrong side rows. And it is important in this because this is knit flat and seamed. So nothing here is worked in the round. So you knit the back first, then you knit the front, you seam them at the shoulders, you knit each sleeve flat, you sew the sleeve onto this edge, and then you seam from here up to the armhole and then down the sleeve. It is a lot of seaming. If you are not comfortable with seaming, this is not the pattern for you. If you are not comfortable with reading cable charts, I don't think this is the pattern for you. It does not include written instructions. You could easily write your own written instructions if you need to. If you were able to do that, again, for most of it, it's pretty easy to memorize, but probably for this central panel, you would need that. There's not a lot of finishing on this, so all of this trim here is worked simultaneously with the front, and then at the end, you just pick up this little I-cord across, and we pick it up on one side and quickly seam it to the other side. Easy peasy. The pattern includes 9 sizes. It also includes an option for short sleeve. So the short sleeve version is, I probably should have used a different hanger because it keeps slipping. The short sleeve version is basically to here, and then you pick up around the armhole with some ribbing. And then there's a recommended Italian bind off, which of course is optional. It's always optional, but it does really look very nice. I am not a type to knit a pattern more than once, but I've seen some of the short sleeve tester versions and they are really cute. And especially if you did them in a 100% like plant-based yarn, I bet they'd be so cute for summer because it's nice and airy. So the recommended yarn for this pattern is Durum Natura Candide, which is a wool cotton, I believe, blend, but it is heavier on the wool. Okay, so that is a sport weight yarn that is 70% wool and 30% cotton. I'm sure it is lovely. However, I opted to use a different yarn, not because, I mean, I love the Durum Natura yarns, but I wanted something that was maybe going to be able to be worn a little more quickly. So I wanted something that was less wool and more cotton. So the yarn I used was Wooldreamers Saona, and this is a 50-50 blend. It is 50% wool, doesn't say what kind, and 50% cotton. I think you can find out a lot more about the wool that they use. Some like family owned, that's a whole saga. You can find more about that on their website, but it just doesn't list it on the yarn label. So this is 240 yards per 50 grams. So this is really perhaps more of a fingering weight yarn. However, it is I don't know if it's woolen spun, but it is very light and lofty, and it is definitely very loosely plied. So this is a bit rustic, and I think because of the texture of the yarn, it substitutes well for a sport weight. Again, the testers used lots of different yarns. I know other people used the Saona, and other people did use the recommended yarn, and some people used something completely different. So you can definitely check out the tester patterns if you want to see what it looks like in different yarns. The testing process for this was lovely. Megan created a Discord group so you could talk to other testers. I'm not super into that, but you know, I know a lot of people are, and it is really fun to be able to see other people's projects. It was completely optional. You did not have to use it. She sent out, I want to say, maybe 2 revisions. So they were just clarifying some instructions regarding the increasing for the armhole, because you are slowly adding another repeat. You're slowly adding another repeat here, and there needed to be a little bit more clarification on that. I think that was pretty much it. The pattern is very detailed. It is nicely laid out. There are different charts for different sizes. It's pretty standard. But most of them are like sizes, you know, like 1 to 3 use this, and it's not like a single chart for every single size in 9 sizes. So there's definitely some overlap. The deadline was very reasonable. I did really squeak in at the end just because I was dithering around and not focusing enough on what I had to do. And also that seaming at the end is very slow. So that part, I'm like, oh, seaming, fine, it'll be so fast. And it never is. um, you know, even if you enjoy or are good at seaming, and I am neither of those things. Set a very reasonable deadline, and I pretty much everyone that I saw posting had finished and had shared their absolutely adorable sweaters. So I showed you the video of me wearing this. You can see that it is a little bit of a cropped fit. You could certainly make the body longer. However, it is worked from the bottom up, so making adjustments to the length can be a little bit trickier. The given measurement for the body is, I want to say, 8 inches for all sizes. So really what is changing the length of the body is the depth of the armhole. And of course, it's a modified drop shoulder. So it has a longer drapey armhole here, but you could definitely increase the length of the body as well. What's very interesting to me is that I did get gauge. And so the body of this sweater fits, it measured out to the, or it blocked out to the schematics exactly. Somehow the sleeves, which are also knit flat, are not quite right. I don't know why. There was no change in like from flat to in the round or vice versa. Somehow my sleeves are just a little bit smaller than they should be. So this should be about 16 inches around, which means 8 inches across, and it's more like 7. I don't know why. It's not the end of the world. It's fine because it is supposed to have some ease and it fits perfectly fine. But ideally, you would have a little bit more space in this area than I do. So the body is generally speaking very loose. It is a rather wide neckline. The neckline is shaped, obviously, with just steady decreases. If you did not want it this wide, you could change your rate of decreasing on the neckline. However, you would also then need to adjust the back neck bind off and the stitch counts for both the front and the back at the shoulder. So that would be something to keep in mind, but it's not impossible. I like the neckline as it is. Another option would be to go in after you have seamed everything and actually add some trim. If you found that the neckline was too big, you could add a hole, because as I said, this is just knit with the body, and then there's a little I-cord at the back, but you could go up all the way around, pick up stitches around the whole neckline, and then work a full I-cord instead of just an applied I-cord, and then to pull everything in. If you thought the neckline was a little too wide, I think the depth of the neckline is good. I could see maybe, as I said, I'm fine with the width of the neckline, but I could see, depending on your frame, that it might slip down the shoulders a little bit. I really like, so the way that the way that all of the edgings for the pieces are written works out really nicely to give you a neat seam line here at the sides. So you see those two there, right there. This column of 2 stockinette stitches, those come together when you seam the sides. And I just think that looks really neat. Also, when you sew in the sleeve, you get this nice 1 column here of single stockinette stitch, which I just think looks really neat and is a really thoughtful detail. She clearly really put a lot of thought into this. So overall, I love this. I love the way it fits. I cannot wait to wear it. I'm not sure what I'll wear under it. So in the video, I am just wearing like a skin colored bra, and I think that will be okay. Or I might consider like a neutral camisole, but overall, I think it's fine. Like, it's a little bit see-through, but if what you're wearing underneath is a skin color, I don't think it's super obvious. I'm not going to be able to wear this until the weather cools down, certainly. But I'm hoping for September, which is why I got the yarn with a little bit less wool and more cotton. So hopefully this will be more of a transition piece for me. So other than, reading cable charts, the only advanced technique here are some short rows at the shoulders that are shaping the shoulders. But she really includes lots of instructions for all of the techniques used. And of course, there are plenty of videos on YouTube as well. So overall, I had absolutely no problems with this pattern. Nothing was confusing. The only part, and obviously I was testing, so I'm not making a lot of changes or modifications to the pattern. The only thing I did change is that when you are working the front and you start doing the decreases here, she has you work across and then attach another ball of yarn and work across and then work back, switch yarns and work back. And the reason she has you do this is to ensure that the two fronts of your garment are symmetrical. I absolutely understand that. I just found it really annoying because the yarns kept getting tangled and it just felt really slow trying to flip things around and untangle the yarns. And so ultimately I did that for like a few rows. And then I just went ahead and worked each front separately. And I paid very close attention to where I was working my decreases and made sure that, you know, they were symmetrical and they were the exact same number of rows. I was rather meticulous about that. But I don't care personally for that technique. And it's not something that ultimately is part of testing the pattern. So I felt okay not doing that. However, something I did want to talk about a little bit is, had I not been testing the pattern, were there any modifications I would have made? So a big thing people are probably thinking is the fact that it is seamed, and maybe you might want to make it seamless. I would not make it seamless. I think that the seams provide some good structure because with all of the eyelets, despite the cabling, with all of the eyelets, this is a very open, drapey fabric. And the way that this works out is that you've basically got 2 knits, 2 purls, 4 knits, 2 purls, 2 knits, 2 purls. So it's basically like a ribbing. It really has a lot of stretch to it. And I think that the seams at the sides give it some needed structure. What I think I would do, however, is, as I said, you knit the front and the back, you do 3 needle bind off at the shoulders, and then you knit the sleeves flat and sew them along the top of the shoulder. So you sew the sleeve, you lay this part flat out, and then you sew the sleeve in here for the shoulder. I would try picking up the sleeve from that point and knitting it down. So she has you mark the spots for sewing it in, for sewing the sleeve in with locking stitch markers. And I think instead I would try picking up the sleeve. I would still knit the sleeve flat, but I would pick it up from the shoulder and knit down to the cuff. 1, because I don't like seaming. Nobody does. 2, because getting your sleeve the right length is going to be a lot easier if you're knitting it down rather than up. And 3, because that gives you the chance to make sure that you're not, you know, if your sleeve feels like it's narrowing too much and you don't think that it's going to end up being wide enough, you can kind of adjust for that. You can maybe make your cuff a little wider. So I would still knit the sleeve flat, but I think I would pick it up from the body. I would at least try it. If I didn't, I think I would still reverse the sleeve and knit it from the top down. So it's worked from the cuff up flat. I think I would work it from the top down flat again, because it's going to give you more control over the length. If your sleeve is too long or too short, you can take out the cuff and adjust the length. You really can't do that. Once your sleeve is sewn in and it has been worked from the cuff up, you cannot easily pull out the cuff bind off because it's a cast on and adjust the length. So I think even if I did not pick the sleeve up from the body, I might make that change. The other thing is everything has a 2x2 rib, which is fine. I just personally like a 1x1 rib on the cuff. And then if you're working the cuff down and you do a 1x1 rib, you can also do an Italian bind off, which looks nicer than this. I mean, this is fine, but I do, and there are ways to do an Italian bind off with a 2x2 cuff. I just don't think it looks as nice. So that's another modification that I might make. The last one is, as I said, you do a little applied I-cord across the back to finish it. And that's done at the end. But I think I have used a lateral braid bind off for a number of my projects recently. It has a very similar look to the I-cord, but it is worked when you're binding off. You don't have to go back and pick it up. And I think that would actually look nice here. So I think I would have given that a try. Doing that bind off, if it ended up not looking right, you can just pull it out. But I think that would have been a nice way to finish this up without having to go back in and add that I-cord. So those are the changes. I think I might make some modifications if I were knitting this not as a tester. The only other thing I wanted to comment on was the yarn. So this is, I like this yarn. It was comfortable to wear without anything underneath. It is nice and lofty and airy. It has nice drape for this project. It is very splitty. And I actually think that would have been okay if I was not working on a deadline. But because I was trying to knit this very quickly to meet a deadline, I wasn't able to go slower, which is what you usually want to do if you're using a yarn that is prone to splitting. You might just knit a little slower. Make sure that you're always catching both plies. So it's a 2-ply yarn, and it was relatively easy to accidentally get the needle in between the plies, especially when working the cable crosses. And I do my cables without a cable needle. And so I was getting very frustrated by that. Had I not been working on a deadline, I don't think it would have been an issue. I would happily use this yarn again. I do think it was lovely for this project. That is just something to keep in mind. If you personally find the splittiness of a yarn has a big impact on whether or not you like to use it, I would note that about this. It was pretty splitty. It's kind of the nature of working with a yarn that is 2 different fibers sometimes and has this kind of rustic spin and rustic plying techniques. So it is a lovely yarn, a little bit splitty. The last thing I wanted to say, and I don't know if she's going to make some adjustments based on the tester feedback. I ended up with a whole 1.5 extra balls of yarn. So the estimated yardage for my size was 1,300, and mine came out at about 1,100 yards, the finished garment, including the swatch. I don't know if she is going to gather feedback from testers about the yardage used and maybe make some adjustments. You know, you do want to have a little bit of leeway, but on the other hand, now I've got an extra ball of yarn. I'm not going to return it because I ordered it online, and it doesn't make sense to take the time and effort to send back a $9 ball of yarn. But now I've got a kind of extra ball of yarn that I don't really have anything to do with. It's a fingering weight yarn, but it's not appropriate for socks. I don't know. So something to keep in mind when you look at the estimates for the pattern. If it still says that the size 2 uses 1,300 yards, my personal experience was that it does not, and it uses less by about 200 yards. Your mileage may vary. So overall, for this project, I used about 4.5 balls of yarn. So we're going to have to say 5. And I purchased the yarn for, I just checked, I was wrong, $10 a ball. So that makes it $50 for the finished sweater in the size 2, which I think is pretty reasonable. And I began this project in mid to late May, and the deadline was July 7th. So overall, it took me less than 2 months to knit, including all of that seaming. So that was my experience of test knitting the Tea Time sweater from Meghan Babin. As I said, this was just released on July 16th. So that was just a couple of days ago when you're watching this, not while I'm filming it. Definitely you want to grab this pattern. I think it's going to be great as a transition piece. It's just beautiful. Love it. Love the stitch pattern. Well-written pattern. Beautiful finished design. Lots of thoughtful details. Absolutely love it. All right, fiber friends, I hope you enjoyed this little kind of behind the scenes peek at the Tea Time sweater design that was just published. Again, I had a lovely time testing of this, and I absolutely love the finished sweater. Thank you for joining me for this video. If you found it interesting or useful or entertaining, I hope you will give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe. New knitting videos here every Saturday. If you're looking for me on social media, you can find me on Ravelry and Instagram as Media Peruana, and I will see you soon in another video.